I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but it feels like this author is writing about topics that he has no experience with, or he just touches on these topics without wanting to delve deep into them, including... Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Perks of Being a Wallflower. The book is by Chbosky and was published in 1999, and then the movie came out in 2012, and Chbosky adapted the script and directed the movie. So the only other creator who I have talked about who has wrote the book, adapted the script, and directed the movie was Michael Crichton for The Great Train Robbery. So it is a rare occurrence to have the writer direct the film. That's what's unusual. But yeah, so that is definitely something unique about this one. And we are in subscriber month. I forgot to mention it last week with Jurassic Park, but this is subscriber month, and Blake the sequel is the one who requested Perks of Being a Wallflower, so thank you to them for suggesting this one. Also, my cat Chloe is in my lap. You can't really see her, but hopefully she will be unintrusive during this video. Of course, if she gets to be a disturbance, I will kick her out of the room. And I know that this is a book and movie that means a lot to a lot of people in a very deep, personal way. And if you are one of those, I love that there is a book/movie out there that you identify with and that means so much to you and that speaks to you and that inspires you. Like, that's fantastic. And I'm not going to talk you out of liking this book or movie. I'm not going to try to convince you that you shouldn't like what you like. However, having said all of that, I personally was not a huge fan of either book or movie, and so throughout this video, I will be sharing why I didn't like either one particularly much. And so if you are someone who really loves this book or movie, maybe this video isn't one you should watch. I would love to hear from people who love this down below in the comments, and I would love to hear your perspective and why you love this so much. And again, I want to be able to have a conversation about this, like I want viewers who disagree with me, I don't want my audience to agree with all of my views, right? And so if you disagree with me in a video, I would love to hear from you down below in the comments and we can talk about it. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that if you love this book or movie, I'm giving you a warning that I did not like it and I will be critiquing it. And so you can use your own discretion to decide if this is a video that is worth your time to watch. But this is a coming-of-age story about Charlie, a teenager who is starting high school, and the book spans his freshman year as he makes new friends, falls in love, has a teacher who mentors him, and he deals with grief, not only grief from the suicide of his best friend, but also he is still coming to terms with the death of his beloved aunt, who was living with his family in the book. She died like 8 years prior, but he is still struggling with that, and he still really misses her. And I actually saw this movie on DVD shortly after it came out on DVD, and I was not a fan of it. And it was this movie that made me decide that coming-of-age stories are just not for me. And so for the longest time, I was just like, anything coming-of-age related, not interested. Up until 2021, almost 10 years later, I read What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and that is also a coming-of-age story, and I ended up loving that one. And so after that, I reevaluated my opinions on this genre, and so since then I have read and watched a lot of coming-of-age stories, and I now consider myself a fan of this kind of story. And so with that in mind, I was very curious to return to the movie Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I was curious to read the book, which I have never read, and just see how my opinions have changed. But as you know from what I said just a couple minutes ago, I still did not like this movie, and I also did not particularly like this book. And so while I am someone who likes coming-of-age stories, I just don't like this coming-of-age story, I have decided. And I should say that even though I saw this movie before, I remembered so little about it, hardly anything. And so I think that also tells you what little impact it had on me when I watched it back in, 2012, because this is the type of movie that for some people, it really sticks with them. And there's these powerful lines and powerful moments that they always remember. And, it's so impactful. And yet for me, I remembered so little. All I remembered was that I didn't like it. And so that, again, just shows what little impact it had on me personally. And maybe it's because my high school experience was nothing like Charlie's, and so maybe I just could not relate. And yet, I don't really think that's what's to blame, because I have not been in the situation that Conrad from Ordinary People was in. because that too is a coming of age story about a rich high school boy, and yet that book and movie are incredible, and it gets me right in the heart every time. And within that story, there are things that I think everyone can connect to. Whereas with Perks of Being a Wallflower, I feel like it's trying too hard and it thinks too highly of itself. And the serious topics it talks about, none of them are delved into in a deep enough way or in a satisfying way. And again, it just really bothers me because it comes across like this book and movie thinks they're so profound. And I'm just like, you are not as profound as you think you are. And also, Ordinary People, it does a great job at centering the story around just a few traumatic events, but allowing so much to come from just a handful of these things. Whereas this, Perks of Being a Wallflower, it just piles on one traumatic event right after the other while not digging into any of them, again, in a specific enough way. And then also, this movie has the audacity to have cast Julia Garner, who I assume must have been in a deleted scene, and yet in the final cut, she has no lines whatsoever. And she is a fantastic actress, so that was a huge wasted opportunity. And I say this somewhat jokingly because, of course, at the time she was a nobody and everybody has to start somewhere. And a lot of amazing actors start out in these background roles that have no dialogue. So I get that's just the way it is. But yeah, Julia Gardner is amazing. And so when I saw her at the start of the movie, I was like, oh, wow, that's so exciting. She's in this. And then I was disappointed because she didn't have a single line of dialogue. But now it is time to move on to the details of the plot, so there will be spoilers going forward. So honestly, Charlie in the book, he's kind of the epitome of I'm not like other boys, and he's also a total pick-me too. And so as I was reading this, I was realizing that he is both of these things. And I was like, wow, how come we only use those terms for women and girls, right? Like it's kind of sexist. We don't also use it towards the male gender because so many men and boys fit the I'm not like other boys and are also just total pick-me's, right? And I should clarify that I personally have never heard anyone use the term pick-me to describe a man. And I also, you hear about the I'm not like other girls trope all the time, but I personally have never heard that to describe a guy. But that doesn't mean someone hasn't used it to describe a man or a boy. So yeah, I personally have never heard anyone use it, but that doesn't mean it has never been done, of course. And also we do have the term nice guy, right? Which is not a positive thing because nice guys are the ones who feel entitled to things because like, oh, I'm treating her so nice, so therefore she owes me. But that doesn't really describe Charlie because he doesn't necessarily feel entitled to anything. And so that's why I think he's not a quote unquote nice guy. He is a I'm not like other boys, or maybe even a pick me, depending on how exactly you would define that. But anyway, we are meant to like him and we hear his inner thoughts, how he thinks of girls in a more respectful way than other boys in high school. And he's so special and different. And yet the main hot girl, Sam, isn't interested in him and instead chooses to date a guy who doesn't appreciate her as much as Charlie does. And I read that the author wrote this book when he was in college dealing with a breakup of his own. And so that is what inspired him to write this. And some of Charlie's views seem to reflect the author's. And so it makes me roll my eyes at the author as well, because he probably had a lot of these annoying, quote unquote, nice guy / I'm not like other guys personality traits. Being like, I treat girls so nice and yet they don't want to be with me. That's not fair. I know I'm being so harsh towards Charlie. I already feel bad. Maybe I'm being too mean. But anyway, we also get a scene in both when he gives Christmas presents to his new group of friends, and each of them are so surprised that he actually listened to them and he knew exactly the kind of gift that would mean a lot to them. However, in the book, Sam and Patrick are not surprised because they have known him for a few months at this point. And so while everybody else is like, oh, wow, like, I didn't know he knew. I didn't know he was listening. Sam and Patrick share a knowing look because they have been well aware how special Charlie is and he's not like other kids. And then there is also a scene when they have a toast for Charlie, and it happens earlier, and in the movie it happens after he tells Sam that his best friend committed suicide, and so they're kind of feeling sorry for him, I guess. But it was just so cheesy, especially in the book when this happened. I was just like, are you serious right now? Like, It just felt so silly. I don't know. I didn't like it. But to be fair, Sam does call Charlie out in the end for not being as good a person as he thinks, and how just listening to someone talk or just wanting the best for someone, it isn't enough. And you also need to take action in life, and you need to call people out on their crap when they're doing something bad to themselves or others. And you also need to make sure you are happy and not always just focus on whether or not those around you are happy. And so again, he feels like, oh, I'm so different from all the other boys and I'm so selfless and I appreciate Sam for who she really is. And, her photographer boyfriend in the book, he's like, it's like Craig thinks that his photo skills are what makes Sam beautiful in the pictures, when I know that it's Sam's beauty that makes the photos beautiful. So I just wanted to share the actual quote from the book. So we read, "It's just that Craig doesn't really listen to her when she talks. I don't mean that he's a bad guy, because he's not. It's just that he always looks distracted. It's like he would take a photograph of Sam and the photograph would be beautiful, and he would think that the reason the photograph was beautiful was because of how he took it. If I took it, I would know that the only reason it's beautiful is because of Sam. I just think it's bad when a boy looks at a girl and thinks that the way he sees the girl is better than the girl actually is. And I think it's bad when the most honest way a boy can look at a girl is through a camera. It's very hard for me to see Sam feel better about herself just because an older boy sees her that way." Anyway, the point is that Sam does call him out on this in the end, being like, you can't just sit back and want the best for people. That's not enough. You actually need to do something and take action, and maybe also risk not being liked, right? And so anyway, there are some good nuggets in this book, which I will get into later in this video as well. But we also have a teacher who sees how smart Charlie is, and so he assigns him extra books outside of class. And in the book in particular, this storyline was kind of ridiculous, because in the end, he has Charlie over. I think they have him over for lunch. He has the teacher and his girlfriend have Charlie over for lunch. And during this lunch, the teacher tells Charlie, like, you're the smartest person I've ever met. And I don't mean the smartest student. Like, no, you are the smartest person I have ever met. And I was just like, are you serious? This is so dumb for it to be revealed that, like, Charlie is secretly a genius and he had no idea. And also, I know this was the 90s, but it seems weird that they invited a 16-year-old boy over to their house, just the two of them and this boy. Like, it felt weird. Was that normal in the 90s? I don't know, but it felt slightly inappropriate. And then another detail, though, that is unique to the book is that in the book, this teacher gives Charlie naked lunch to read, which I just did a video for. But what kind of a sicko pervert teacher would give this to a high school freshman to read? Like, I'm hesitant to recommend that to a fellow adult, let alone a 15, 16-year-old kid who clearly is, going through a lot of stress in his life and whatever. And the teacher does admit later, like, he was going through a hard time with his girlfriend when he had recommended that. But the fact that he recommends that, just that itself is just like, are you kidding me right now? That is so inappropriate. But then on top of that, Charlie has so little to say about the book. At the start, when he begins it, he says, like, oh, I had a hard time understanding it. But then I talked to Sam and she's read it and she said, you just got to go with the flow and not try to understand it. So that's what he does. And then he finishes the book and has like nothing to say about it. Like, how could anybody read that book and not have some opinions, And so it honestly made me wonder if the author Chbosky, has he never read Naked Lunch? Because if he had, I feel like, how can anyone who read that book have nothing to say about it? Again, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but it feels like this author is writing about topics that he has no experience with, or he just touches on these topics without wanting to delve deep into them, including Naked Lunch, because how can you read that book and not have opinions on it, Anyway, in the movie, the teacher does not tell him he is a genius, he does not have him over to his house, and he does not give him naked lunch. And so they improve the storyline quite a bit in the film. But I don't want to sound like a total cynic. And I did want to say that I actually do really like the relationship he has with his teacher here in the movie specifically. But I really like it because this was something I could relate to, because I had an art teacher that took an interest in my brother and I because we were in Art 1. And most people in Art 1, aren't that interested in art. And so my brother and I had more talent than the average Art 1 student. But then also I, of course, was super into movies, as was my brother. And so the art teacher, he also was into movies. And so we would talk about that as well. But his encouragement with our art is something that really impacted us. And I remember, we both went on to take other art classes. And my brother, he specifically said, like, I was not going to go beyond Art 1, except this teacher inspired him to continue taking art classes, And so the support of a teacher and the encouragement of a teacher, it can make such a big impact in a kid's life. And so I do like that we see that here in the movie. And then also another thing in the book, kids tease him and call him the teacher's pet because he and this teacher get along so well. But that too, like, oftentimes kids who are a teacher's pet, they need that validation and approval from someone. And if they're not getting it at home, they seek it from their teachers, And so that's Charlie, he had good parents in this story, but still, he obviously was going through a lot of inner struggles. And so this connection with the teacher meant a lot to him. And so basically, like, kids who are teachers' pets, they're that way for a reason. And sometimes it's because they have something difficult going on in their life or at home or whatever. And so I can appreciate how this book too is showing that, I don't know, not to judge people and to know that there's more going on in a person's life and to not be a bully and make fun of kids for being a teacher's pet. But to continue with things I did not like about this book, another big complaint I have is that literally every woman in this story experiences some sort of sexual assault or abuse. And so we get a part, it's like before the halfway point. Sam kisses Charlie for the first time. But before she kisses him, we read, she told me about her first time being kissed. And at this point in the story, again, it's less than halfway. And yet we have already heard so many stories about one woman, one girl after another being assaulted in some way. And so when I read that line, my thought was like, let me guess, it's going to be some guy who forced himself on her. And yes, that was the case, except it was even worse than that because it was an adult man who kissed her when she was only a child. But then in the book, we also have his mom and his aunt who were beaten by their father when they got bad grades. And then the aunt was also molested by a grown man when she was a child. You have the dad's sister who also dated bad guys who treated her terribly. Charlie's sister keeps dating a guy who hit her in front of Charlie, but she keeps dating him. Sam, who had her first kiss, as well as just other guys treating her poorly. And then in the book, there's also a story from when Charlie is a kid. I think it was when his brother is having a high school party at their house. And he is in his bedroom, and two teenagers come in, and they know he is there. Like, they're like, hey, can we hang out in this room? And he's like, okay. And then, despite them knowing that Charlie is right there, the guy then proceeds to rape this girl, and it's described pretty vividly. And then on top of that, you also have the trauma going on between Patrick and Brad, who are both gay, but this is the early 90s and Brad is a football jock, and so he keeps it a secret. But then his dad walks in on he and Patrick, and so he ends up beating Brad up horribly, and there's just a lot of drama and messed up stuff that happens because of the homophobia of the time. And then, of course, we have the big reveal in the end that Charlie, he had been molested by his aunt when he was very young prior to her death, but he had kind of blocked it from his memory, and so it's this realization he has at the end of the story. And I obviously realize that SA is a very real thing that happens a lot, and I am, believe me, I am more than aware that almost every single woman has a story of some sort of SA, sexual harassment, something happening at least once in her life. But I would be willing to bet that most women have more than one story they could tell, right? And, to varying degrees of how severe it was. So I totally understand that this is a very real thing that happens very often. And again, the majority of women in particular have a story that they could share about this. And so my problem isn't that he's writing about this or that he's writing about it happening to so many of the female characters. My problem is just the way he writes about it. It almost felt like he was trying to cram as many upsetting topics and scenarios as he could into one book. And these are things that are very upsetting to read about. And it brings up all of these heightened emotions within you as you're reading it. And so, of course, it's going to get a reaction from the readers and it's going to stir up strong emotions. And so I feel like sometimes authors will do this as a way to guarantee that their readers will feel something, But then when you think like, yeah, it's making me feel emotion, but is it earned emotion? I would argue no, it is not earned, and that he is just obviously using these, hot button issues in order to manipulate the audience and to force them to feel something. And then also when Charlie has this realization about his aunt, I wished we would have delved more into that, but it literally happens like right at the very end of the story. And so then it's like, we're not going to get more into this. And in the book, Charlie, he does go to a hospital because he sort of like blacks out and isn't aware of what he's doing. And then his parents come home and find him, and then they take him to a hospital, and then he talks to a therapist and everything comes out. But then we get this paragraph. It's like if I blamed my Aunt Helen, I would have to blame her dad for hitting her, and the friend of the family who fooled around with her when she was little, and the person that fooled around with him, and God for not stopping all of this, and things that are so much worse. And I did do that for a while, but then I just couldn't anymore, because it wasn't going anywhere, because it wasn't the point. And I get that it is not good to hold on to blame and anger towards someone for what they have done to you. Like, for your own sake, you need to let that go in order to move on and live a good life. And so this sentiment that he shares here, it is something I can get on board with, but I feel like the way the author wrote about this, it's almost like he's letting the aunt off too easy for what she had done. And I get she has her past trauma and she herself was molested. And so it's not fair, right? And yet at the same time, regardless of what your past is, you were the one who is choosing to do what you are doing right now, And so it doesn't matter what your past is. Like, don't blame other people. Like, you are the one making the choice right here, right now. And so the aunt, she still made the choice to do what she did. And it was horrible. And it's the worst kind of abuse, right? Abuse towards a child, physical abuse, sexual abuse. It's just so upsetting and disturbing to read about, and not something that should be written about lightly. And again, I do think it's good that Charlie is forgiving her and he's learning to move on. And also the fact that she is dead now. It's not like he can confront her about it. So in some ways, it feels even more pointless to hold on to the anger, because it's like, she's dead. So you may as well just let it go as best you can and continue living your life, I guess. And then also the book does share the allegory about the two men who are raised by an alcoholic. And one man grows up to be totally sober, whereas the other man grows up to be an alcoholic himself. And both of them, they are living two totally different lives, and yet both of them attribute their father and their childhood to their current decisions. And so the point is how people can experience the same thing, and yet at the end of the day, they choose where they want that to take them. And so you could say that the aunt experienced this abuse and she chose to take it in a negative way. Whereas I guess Charlie, at the end of the story, he is choosing to, despite this abuse, to not let it dictate his life in a negative way and go in a positive direction with it. And so I do like the message. It's just because of the abuse that's being written about is something so upsetting. Again, I just don't love all in all the way the author chose to write about this topic. And the more I think about this, I think another issue I have with the way this was written is how Charlie, he has this realization that he had this repressed memory. He has this realization at the end of the school year, so like June. And by the time the new school year begins, it is August, and he has already come to such a healthy place about this all. And so I feel like the author, again, is doing a disservice to people who really have this happen to them. And I mean, granted, we don't see Charlie progress through the years, but it's like he got to a good place so quickly. And I'm sure a lot of people who have had this happen, it takes much longer than just a few months, right? To be totally over it and have forgiven the person. And he is able to hold on to the positive memories of his aunt despite what she did. And so it's cleaned up so nicely in such a short amount of time. And so I feel like that is very inaccurate to the experience people have who have actually had this happen to them. And so, yeah, everybody's storyline who experiences all of these traumas throughout the book, all of them, it's just way too cleaned up by the end of it all. And I will be getting into this later in the video, but in the book, he is just using the shotgun approach when it comes to difficult experiences because he has so much going on. And so again, that does a disservice to each of these things that happens because again, none of them are delved into. And so just this alone with his aunt, we are talking about not only sexual abuse against a child, but it's also incest. And so it's like, that is a huge topic. And so I feel like the whole book should have been about that, right? rather than just having it be one of many things that are talked about. And I would also love to know the impact. I know this is from Charlie's perspective, but again, this should have been the focus of the book, and we could have also gotten into how this affects his family too, like his mom, for example. That was her sister. And so I would just have loved to really delve into this topic and explore all the avenues and the fallout from this. And so, yeah, instead the author is just covering 100 different things and therefore doesn't get detailed into any of them. And I know I just said it only took him a few months to get over it, but I do realize that this happened when he was 7 and he is now 16 by the time summer hits. And so he has had these repressed memories for almost 10 years. So clearly they have been impacting his life in negative ways. And anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that while over the course of a few months, he seems all fine, obviously this is something he has been, it's been going on internally for him for nearly 10 years. So there is that aspect of the story. But it kind of comes across like he just chose to write about this topic that he did no research into and knows nothing about. And it felt borderline exploitative. And also I want to clarify that even if the author, this is not his lived experience, I'm fine with authors writing about things that they themselves haven't experienced. To go back to Ordinary People, I know I keep bringing this up, but for one, that book is written by a woman, and yet in the book, we are in the perspective of the son and his father. So she's in the perspective of 2 males. So obviously that is not her lived experience, and yet she's writing about it. So yeah, I am totally fine with people writing about something that they themselves have not experienced. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then we also get the line in both book and movie when the teacher tells Charlie, "We accept the love we think we deserve." And this is a true sentiment, but I kind of feel like you can tell Chbosky was just so proud of this line, the way he really builds up the moment before Paul Rudd says it. And this is one of those times where it almost feels like a negative that the writer is also directing the movie, because it almost feels like he's just tooting his own horn and he's just so proud of this line he wrote, and now he's going to make it be this big moment in the movie when Paul Rudd says it. And again, it just came across like one of those moments where the movie Chbosky thinks he's being more profound than he really is. And granted, I don't know, maybe I read this when I was too old. Maybe if I read this when I was 13, it would have really hit me and it would have been more profound. But I watched this movie when I was in my 20s and this line didn't hit me. I had totally forgotten about it. And watching it now in my 30s too. Sorry, my cat just moved that. Again, it's just kind of like almost too self-aware, and he's like too proud of this line he wrote. And the book and movie have so many lines like this, to be honest. We have the whole, "I feel infinite," or "we are infinite," whatever it is he says. It's brought up so much in the book and movie, and that is one thing I had remembered from when I watched this the first time was that line. And I remember, again, in my 20s, I was like, wow, that's so dumb. And then, of course, now in my 30s, I still am just kind of like, oh, wow, that's so dumb. Granted, they're teenagers. I know I said and did dumb things when I was a teenager that maybe I thought were so much smarter than they were. I'm not sure. Which again goes back to what I just said, that maybe if I first read or watched this when I was younger, maybe it would have really hit home for me. But as it is, I'm just like, some of these lines are just so bad. Also, the movie, this wasn't in the book, but in the movie, when he becomes part of the friend group and she's like, "Welcome to the island of misfit toys." And even though I like the Rocky Horror connection, that too almost felt a bit too much, where it's like, we get it. They all feel like outcasts and they're so unique and they're so different. So they identify with all of these misfits, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, anyway, just a lot of dumb lines in both book and movie. And Chbosky wrote the script, so he can be blamed for all of the lines, even if it's a line from the movie that wasn't in the book. I did want to add, though, that maybe these lines are meant to be cheesy because, like I said, as teens, we often say things that later on, when we think back on it, we realize how dumb it was. But in the moment, we didn't realize it was dumb. So is that his intent? I kind of think that wasn't his intent, and he does think these lines are really good, but I don't know, maybe it's meant to seem ridiculous because that's the way teenagers are. By the way, if you are a teenager listening to this, I'm sorry, I mean no disrespect, but I know that, yeah, when I was a teen, I said plenty of things that I now cringe at. And then also in both book and movie, Charlie has a best friend that has committed suicide shortly before school begins. And in the movie, this detail was so not explored, and it almost feels like, why did they even bother to include it when it's like it's just this small little footnote. Whereas in the book, this is something that is brought up more. But as I have been saying with the book, there is just so much trauma that this just felt like one more thing tossed in. And so I can almost picture Chbosky with like a trauma checklist, like gotta make sure I got all the big hitters, teen pregnancy, teen abortion, violence against women, violence against girls, child abuse, child molestation, multiple counts of those ones, by the way, violence against gay people, racism by an old man, teen suicide, depression, mental breakdowns, incest. And so he is just throwing all of this into one book. But to mention some things that are in the book but not the movie, so with his sister in the movie, he secretly sees the boyfriend hit her, whereas in the book, he was right there in the room, and the guy knows Charlie saw because he was right there. And then later, Charlie tells his teacher about this, and so the teacher tells the parents, and the parents, of course, tell the daughter that they cannot see this guy anymore. But from here, they just continue to date in secret, and it isn't until she gets pregnant and Charlie takes her to get an abortion that she then breaks up with this guy in the book. And then we see his college-age brother in the movie, and we know he plays football, but in the book he was a much bigger character and his football was a bigger focus as well. And Charlie's family in general was just a bigger part of the book, both his immediate family, but also his extended family. We hear much more about them. And also, like I mentioned, we hear so much more about his aunt too, and how they will go to her grave site, and just how much she meant to him when he was a kid, and how she came to live with them for a time because she was going through so many hard things in her own life. And then also in the book, Sam and Patrick are chain smokers. They are constantly smoking cigarettes, and this in turn has Charlie smoking cigarettes too. And the movie chose to cut this, which honestly, that was another pet peeve of mine, because it's like, we're seeing them drink alcohol and do various kinds of drugs, and yet, God forbid, we show teenagers smoking, right? Like, I am by no means an advocate for smoking. I don't smoke cigarettes, and I don't think you should either. And yet, drugs and alcohol are just as dangerous in their own ways, sometimes even more dangerous. And so the fact that we have demonized cigarettes while also glamorizing alcohol, or, this is a whole other tangent I could go on. But yeah, we make such a big deal about cigarettes, and it's like, oh, they had to cut the cigarettes from the movie, and yet we still see them getting drunk and doing drugs. So what was wrong with the cigarettes on top of that, But I know I have been such a hater throughout this video, so I did want to mention some things that I did like. First of all, I do like the cast. I like Logan, Lerman. I like Paul Rudd and their roles. I do like Emma Watson as Sam. And, Watson is someone that I think is great in Harry Potter and Little Women. But here, there are a few times where her line delivery just comes off so wooden and phony, and I think that it is due to bad dialogue, not because she is a bad actress. And then I also like seeing Johnny Simmons in this movie. He played the boyfriend in Jennifer's Body, and he was fantastic in that movie, and then I also really liked him here, playing a very different role. And then I also like some of the messages of the book, including the fact that just because there is someone going through something worse than you, it doesn't therefore make your worries and problems insignificant, right? Like they still matter, and you're still justified to be stressed or worried or scared about whatever it is you have going on, even if it's not as bad as what someone else is dealing with. And then also, like I said earlier, I like the message that despite your past experiences and things that were out of your control and who your parents are, at the end of the day, you still have full control on who you choose to become and what you choose to do with your life. And this was kind of, it was very East of Eden with the "thou mayest" line, that whole discussion in East of Eden. But as far as this theme goes, I think East of Eden did a much better job exploring this message. But I think maybe Perks of Being a Wallflower is a good stepping stone. Like as a teenager, you could read Perks of Being a Wallflower before then, when you're older, reading East of Eden, which delves into these topics so much better, in my opinion. And I also kind of liked in the movie when there is a falling out due to him dating Mary Elizabeth, but then he kisses Sam at the party when he was dared to kiss the prettiest girl. And later he is talking to Mary Elizabeth about them being his friends, and she is like, "Oh, you mean the people I have known since kindergarten who you just met 6 months ago?" And I kind of like that she gives him this slap in the face in a way, because this was something that I felt rang true, because he is feeling like he's making this powerful connection with these people. And yet, as far as some of them are concerned, when push comes to shove, he is not their equal because he does not have their shared past. And so, Mary Elizabeth, she's like, you can't just show up and act like you're the same level of friendship as the rest of us because we've known each other for 10 years, whereas you've just been here for 6 months. And I think maybe one of the reasons I liked this part is because this was something I could relate to, because I went to 5 different high schools over the course of 4 years, 5 different high schools. And so I would try to, forge these connections. And yet I always felt like the odd one out who didn't have the shared history and the shared past. And I was always trying to fit in, but never quite feeling like I belonged. And it's not like kids were mean and straight up would say stuff like Mary Elizabeth has said, but in subtle ways, right? Where you feel like you're not equal with these people because you've just barely shown up. And so, yeah, just feeling like an outsider and wanting those connections so badly. And yet when something happens, you realize like, whoa, maybe I'm not as important to these people as I thought I was. And struggling to be comfortable in your own skin and wanting to be liked and so those aspects of the story I could relate to. And yeah, this moment in particular with Mary Elizabeth, it's so harsh of her to say this, right? And yet this is something that I felt more and was more impacted by. And then also something else I liked is that they both book and movie reference Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is a fantastic movie. The music in that is just incredible. And so it was fun to see that be referenced. But when it comes to which one wins, I have been going back and forth between book and movie deciding because I didn't love either one. And I feel like I could come up with just as many reasons as to why I should say the book wins as to why I should say the movie wins. There are a couple performances I really like in the movie, and I also like that the movie cuts down on the trauma every single character is going through, and they simplify that part. But yeah, honestly, I could come up with just as many complaints for the movie as I could for the book. But so while filming, I had said that the book wins, but while editing, I'm realizing that I have to say the movie wins because I do like how they filmed Charlie's breakdown. I thought that was a well done scene and, it was impactful. But I also just cannot get over how much trauma is thrown at us in the book. It's, I've been harping on this throughout this entire video so much. And yeah, I just can't get over how much he threw at us without delving into any of it enough. And again, just felt like he was trying to see how much trauma he could fit in here. And then also the book, more so than the movie, kind of comes across as more pompous and self-satisfied in my mind. So yeah, I will say that the movie actually wins here. And I said it before and I'll say it again, but if you want a book about someone in high school experiencing a lot of trauma and a mental health breakdown and depression and a lot of these struggles, please read Ordinary People or watch Ordinary People. Both book and movie are so fantastic. And again, that is one where no matter what your background is, no matter what walk of life you come from, I feel like there is something in that everybody could relate to. And it's not like it's going through a ton of stuff like Perks of Being a Wallflower. Ordinary People isn't tossing one trauma after the other at you. They keep it pretty focused. And yet by keeping it more focused and delving so deeply into these things, it's just so much more relatable. And that's one that I've appreciated even more over time because I liked it when I saw it as a teenager. But when I rewatched it in my 30s, I just loved it even more. And I could relate even more to so much of that, even though, again, I have never been in the situation Conrad has been in. And yet it was such a powerful story. So anyway, definitely check out Ordinary People if you have not already. And thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for putting up with my complaints. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.